Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walters. Joining us today is David Bossie. He is the president of Citizens United and the Citizens United Foundation. He is also a former chief investigator for the U.S. House of Representatives. And David, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, you spent a year interviewing undecided voters for your documentary, The Hope and the Change. Why did many of them re-elect Barack Obama in the end?
You know, that's a great question. And focus group after focus group, and that's really how we found our cast. The Hope and the Change was a film made up of 40 Democrats and independents who all supported Barack Obama in 2008 and then were not going to support him this election cycle. So we were really deep into those voters. And so what we heard and kept hearing from these focus groups, from independents, was that they didn't know Mitt Romney, that they didn't like Barack Obama anymore, but they needed to be given a reason to vote for Mitt Romney, and that they didn't feel they knew him. He had not been introduced to them. They just knew that he was a rich guy who had destroyed companies and had money offshore and wasn't releasing his taxes, which in essence was the Obama line. And so these independents and conservative Democrats who were open to voting for Mitt Romney really, I think at the end of the day, felt like he was not a person that they could connect with. And I think that is really the tissue that this campaign missed out on.
Now, many are saying that the Republican Party needs to change in order to survive. There's talk of softening the Republicans' position on taxes, immigration, perhaps moving to the center, some are saying. Is this an overreaction in your view?
It's an overreaction. It's a misinterpretation. It is a potential death knell for the Republican Party, a permanent minority status in America. You don't, and I'll be honest with you, I'm going to be a guy out there holding people accountable. Conservatives can't become Democrat light and expect to win. That's what Mitt Romney tried to do. Mitt Romney could not run one television commercial against Obamacare. Okay, against the president's marquee legislation that was 60% of the American people disagreed with and didn't want, but he couldn't do it because he was the author of the original Massachusetts plan, which Obama took. So we nominated a guy who couldn't articulate a message that was a good one to beat Barack Obama. And so to blame conservatism is a misreading of the results. And so, as a conservative leader, I'm going to be out there really articulating the fact that this has happened before. You know, we've lost races before. Barry Goldwater got swamped. You know, Reagan lost in '76. We don't win every race. It happens. Okay, it does. We lost the House majority when President Bush was in there. We lose campaigns. You don't want to, but it's okay. You have to find your resolve, understand the core values that the conservative movement is about and the Republican Party stands for, and find those that can articulate it, and find those candidates that can bring it to the American people and sell it, if you will, because it's a product, just like anything. And so, look, I'm a fan of conservatism, and I'm excited about the future. Yes, was I down on Tuesday night and Wednesday when post-election? Yes, but we have a bright future if we stick to our principles.
Okay, in Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission, the Supreme Court ruled that the government cannot ban political spending by corporations in candidate elections. How did this case impact the recent presidential election, and would GOP losses have been greater without it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I think, look, I disagree with a lot of how the super PACs, different ones, spent their money. I think the ads weren't very good, and we spent money in places we shouldn't have, and we didn't spend money where we should have. And that's all the Monday morning quarterbacking that can go on, and that's a fine thing. But the result, I believe, the facts are that if we had not had those super PACs, if we had not had those efforts, we would have lost many more races. because we would have been outspent dramatically in many races where those super PACs really kept it as a 1-to-1 ratio instead of being outspent. And in particular, Barack Obama spent about $1 billion. Barack Obama and the Democrat committee and the unions and his outside super PACs spent $1 billion. Mitt Romney's spent $1 billion. Well, about $400 million of Mitt Romney's was the American Crossroads types of super PACs. And if you had been outspent, $1 billion to $600 million, that's John McCain territory, meaning that's what John McCain was outspent by. So I think you have to say they may not have done everything correctly, but without him we would have lost, I think, some more races, and I think the presidential race wouldn't have been as close.
So potentially Democrats could have, and Barack Obama could have won by a landslide if not for this.
Absolutely, and many other House races that we won by very small margins, we may have lost. So instead of only losing 7 or 8 or 9 races, which some are still up in the air, like Allen West, we may have lost a dozen or 15 and gotten a lot closer to losing that majority.
You worked on Senator D'Amato's Whitewater investigation back in the 1990s. The House and Senate had hearings this week into Benghazi. Do we need an independent commission to investigate exactly what went wrong here?
I have a lot of background in investigations. I ran the Whitewater Committee in the Senate, and I was the chief investigator in the House of Representatives, and I oversaw half a dozen of the top cases in Washington in the 90s during the Clintons' years, from the campaign finance and the dual-use technology cases, really important cases. And when you have important cases like that, you have to have two things. A really aggressive prosecutor who can use the powers of a grand jury or the powers of the Justice Department to investigate. And so I urge there to be some, whether it's an independent counsel or an independent prosecutor appointed, so that they can, without political ramifications, you hope, okay? But then I say, look at what they did to Ken Starr. Ken Starr was just some guy that was appointed, and because he found things that Clinton didn't want, they attacked him, so they vilified him personally. Doesn't mean that you're not going to get that. So you want an independent counsel, but don't think that for a moment that it won't be politicized. But you also need, on the other hand, a very aggressive investigation in Congress. And the reason that you do is that's the court of public opinion. When I was running cases, we wrote criminal referrals to the Justice Department that ended up putting people in prison. But more importantly, what we did is educate the American people, because on a day-to-day basis, we would conduct depositions, we would subpoena documents, and then we were able to release them publicly. And that is really the job of Congress, is to educate the American people. And that is, in this Benghazi issue, this investigation, there's so many pieces to it. I wish for just a minute I had subpoena power and deposition authority like I used to, because it really is a spider web that once you start getting into it, you have to go down a lot of roads, and it's going to be an amazing investigation.
What's the biggest question that you have about Benghazi?
Oh goodness, well, there's so many. The first and foremost one to me is the timeline of the actual event. When they were under attack, when they were actually under attack, what happened? Was the White House informed? Was the CIA informed? Because I believe they were. I believe people within for Joe Biden, in my opinion, to be out there saying nobody communicated with the White House, nobody in the White House heard anything, I think that will be proven to be a falsehood. Mm-hmm. There were men under fire, and we as a nation had a duty to protect them. We had a duty to protect the ambassador. We had a duty to protect those that were protecting the ambassador. Those things, leaving men on a battlefield, is something that we don't do. And so to leave them unprotected, to not answer immediately with a response, whether it's a C-130 gunship that could lay down fire and protect them, whether it's to send in a group from Sicily or Rome that could easily, a Delta Force or some special forces op that is within striking distance, or supersonic aircraft that could continue, could go off a carrier somewhere. You have resources at your disposal if you're the commander-in-chief. To me, those are fundamental questions. Those are the real questions about what this commander-in-chief's about. Now, after all of that's over and our men are dead, you can say to yourself, what's the timeline? Who knew? What did they know? When did they know it? You can start to establish a timeline. You can subpoena whether it's their email chains, their text messages, their phone calls, the satellite uplinks. They have, when you start investigating like this is a rabbit hole. You really have to focus on the communications. And once you figure out who's communicating with who, then you focus on those individuals. And it's not that they did anything wrong. You know what I mean? It's not that you're focused. I don't mean to make it sound like you have individuals, but individuals may have had information that they didn't know what they had. In a pre-9/11 world, pre-9/11 world, it was looked at and thought of differently. You could say, well, we don't know if that's a real attack or that email or that alert. In post 9/11, in the last 10 years, it's not possible for anyone in the national security area to take some piece of data and not have it raise a red flag that this is a terrorist attack. And clearly, just recently, we're hearing, that Petraeus knew immediately that it was an Al-Qaeda attack. If he knew it, other people knew it, and people inside the White House knew it. There's no question about that. So it's really has to. There's so many layers to this onion, and it's very complicated. And if we don't have men and women in Congress, not just the members of Congress, but the staff, the investigators, who are, to be candid, really tough. You have to, because you're not accepted in polite company. You don't get invited to the cocktail parties in Washington when you issue subpoenas to people. It's just not, you don't become very popular. And you have to be willing to take it on the chin. The Washington Post is going to come after you. You have to be okay with it. And there's not a lot of people who are willing to stand up to that. So that's what I would urge the Speaker to do, is to find some people who are pretty hardened.
But this has all the hallmarks of a White House cover-up in your view.
Oh. There's a White House cover-up. There's a CIA cover-up. I mean, look, you have all the elements of a really of a big movie here. Of a dramatic film. You have sex. You have unfortunately our men being killed in an embassy on foreign soil. I mean, you have drama in some big ways that really needs to be untangled.
In speaking about Benghazi in one of the debates, President Obama basically said the buck stops with him, and that he assumed responsibility. How should we hold him accountable?
Oh boy, I'm a guy who wants to know the facts before you determine punishment. And look, the president isn't up for re-election anymore. The president can only be held accountable by public ridicule. And if public ridicule grows, high enough, maybe it changes how he does things in the future. That's really, at the end of the day, the only thing that we can hope for, is that an investigation will prove and show what the White House knew and when they knew it, and the inaction that they didn't take. Look, the Democrats for years, since 9/11, have been attacking President Bush for sitting there when he was reading to the first graders or third grader class, in Florida, I believe, when he was told by Andy Card that we were under attack, and he was ridiculed for it, because then there's a memo that says, well, Osama bin Laden is going to attack the U.S. Of course, he was going to attack the U.S., but because he did attack the U.S., anything that happened beforehand is now subject to analysis of, why didn't you do something about it? Why didn't you do something about that? And of course, you know, in a post 9/11 world, it's a different defense. I mean, President Bush was never able to articulate, well, I didn't do it for these reasons. President Obama's got a tough road to hoe, with the American people on that.
Last question for you, David. You authored the book, The Many Faces of John Kerry. President Obama is considering him for defense secretary. What do you make of this?
Boy, you know, it's going to be distressing for the men and women in military, I can assure you. I think that is, it's a mistake. I'm grateful that I've heard that Panetta is thinking of staying on for an extended period of time because of all these things related to Benghazi and others. Continuity is very important. I'm not sure that the men and women think he's doing all that great a job either supporting their needs, but I think that John Kerry's a slap in the face. I think what he did you know, during Vietnam and after Vietnam, what he did in 2004, you know, in that campaign was really, you know, shameful. Look, you have to have faith in your commanders that when you're being sent to war, which is what we are in today. We're in wars all over the world, whether people in America know it or not. We're in wars all over the place. You have to have faith in your commanders that they're going to be doing the right thing by you. And I worry that the men and women in uniform will be very nervous about a guy named John Kerry as their defense secretary.
All right, David Bossie, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.